So there's this book. It's a science fiction dystopian type of novel. It was written in 1919 and it was published in book form in 1920. It was written by a guy named Milo Milton Hastings, and he was a writer. Mostly he wrote in magazines. So he wrote for a magazine called Physical Culture magazine, where he would give health advice, which was ironic coming from a guy who smoked a pack of cigarettes per day. He did a lot of other stuff too. He was a real jack of all trades. So he invented an industrial egg incubator. He was a chicken farmer. He came up with like some health food snacks. He dabbled in urban planning. So he was kind of all over the place. But he wrote this book in 1919. And the basic premise of this book is that Germany is going to start a Second World War. He's writing this in 1919, remember. So this is like right after the end of World War I. The Weimar Republic has been established in Germany. The Treaty of Versailles has just been signed. And sure, there are some people who predict things might not go so well, but, you know, Germany looks thoroughly conquered for the time being, and I think there is some hope, at least, even without America, that the League of Nations is going to be a success. But this guy, Hastings, the author, he says no. That's all going to fail. The Weimar Republic, that's not going to work. League of Nations, that's not going to work. And Germany is going to rise again. And they're going to start World War II. And they're going to be beaten again. And they're going to be driven back all the way to Berlin. And then they're going to invent a death ray. And that is going to cause a standoff. And then there's basically going to be a Cold War, where there's going to be the Germans living in the fortified city of Berlin, kind of bunkered underground, if you will. And nobody can get in from the outside world because the death ray will kill them. And the death ray isn't portable and not very mobile, so the Germans can't really use it as an offensive weapon. So they're trapped where they are, but they're safe. And then German society will continue to progress inside this domed city. And so that is the world that Hastings describes in this novel of his, City of Endless Night. And he gets a lot of stuff right about Germany. So a lot of stuff that's going to happen in the 20s and 30s and 40s, he predicts in 1919. So he predicts that there's going to be this charismatic dictator who's going to control the society within the walls of Berlin, and they're going to rewrite religion so that the Aryan race, for example, is God's chosen people instead of the Jews. Oh, speaking of Jews, they're no good, so we're going to get rid of them as well. And then we're going to breed a race of supermen, Aryan people, big, blonde, strong, strapping young lads. And we're going to have this autocratic, militaristic society where everyone has their role to play in this, literally national socialist state, because he predicts that it will be socialist and it will be hyper-nationalist. And most of all, it will be very racial and very much governed by eugenics. There is this office of eugenics that decides, who gets to have sex with whom. And it's all very regimented. You get like a calling card, and if you've been selected, right, if you've achieved something intellectually, or you're big and you're strong, then you get selected to go breed. And the mothers of Berlin are only there to breed and sire children, and otherwise the family has been completely abolished. So the men, they do their duty as the fathers of Germany, and then they're out of there. There's no family unit anymore. So really kind of calls to mind the Lebensborn program, which was an actual Nazi program where they're trying to breed a race of blonde supermen. So Hastings predicts that all of this is going to happen in the future within German society, which I personally think is just incredibly impressive, coming from someone writing in 1919. And yes, all of these trends did exist at that time. Like a smart person, who was observing, eugenics, for example. They would have known that this sort of idea was growing in popularity, but in 1919, it was actually more popular, more rooted in America and in the UK than it was in Germany at this time. And of course, the same thing with, anti-Semitism. There's a long history of anti-Semitism in Germany, but the same thing is true across all of Europe and also in the United States. So the fact that Hastings was able to predict this exact thing was going to happen in Germany, and so much of it plays out exactly like it would go on to play out in real life in this book, City of Endless Night, to me was just absolutely jaw-dropping. This is one of the most impressive books that I've ever read in terms of prescience, in terms of predicting exactly what's going to happen next. Now, is this a book review? I guess it kind of is. I mean, here I am holding up a copy of a book and telling you what went on, what the plot was, what happened in the book. So I guess it's kind of a book review. Although I'm not going to call it a book review, because I'm not going to recommend anything. Because here you can see it's edited, this 100-year anniversary edition, by Luke Boardman. And I am Luke Boardman. So I've got a conflict of interest. I earn 22 cents every time this paperback is sold. So I cannot give you a conclusion to the book review. I can't tell you if it's worth your money and your time to go pick it up. I can only tell you why I thought it was worth my time. So why I spent, several hundred hours in 2020 editing this book and turning it into an audiobook and, proofreading it and correcting all the typos and modernizing some of the language and creating some new sort of interstitial material that better explains some of the sort of neglected, plot holes in the story. Why did I take the time to make a 100-year anniversary edition of this book? And that's why. I think it's criminally underappreciated. And I think it should be in, the literary canon. It should be one of those famous 20th century dystopian science fiction books that we think of, along with Brave New World and 1984 and Fahrenheit 451 and all the rest. Especially Fahrenheit 451. I mean, come on. A book that warns about the dangers of censorship and dictatorship in the 1950s? 10 to 20 years after we had already seen exactly that thing happen. That's like somebody writing a book in 2005 about the dangers of Islamic extremism. We already know. We already saw it in real life. We don't need the warning. Thank you. But anyway, it's just my personal beef with Fahrenheit 451. I apologize. So, why is this book not currently in the canon? Why is it not currently being taught in high schools all over America, for example, while books like 1984, Brave New World, and Fahrenheit 451 are? Part of it is that it's a little poppy, it's a little bit pop lit in terms of style. It's not Hemingway. It's not breaking new ground in terms of literary style. It's not like a literary masterpiece. It's not character-driven either, which modern writing, especially modern literature, very often is. These are very often, personalities-driven. They're, studies of the human character of individuals. We've got anti-heroes and moral ambiguity, and that's what we expect from modern literature. And that's not in this book. In that way, it's a lot like Brave New World, right? Brave New World is also not a character study. Brave New World is also about concepts and big ideas. And that's true of this book as well. But I still think it kind of hurts it a little bit whenever we look at it with modern eyes and say, is this a work of literary, masterpiece? And you'd be like, more so, it kind of reads like a Rover Boys adventure, right? So it doesn't quite feel like you're, diving into something deep and powerful and meaningful whenever you pick up this book, even though it is. But it's deep and powerful and meaningful on a conceptual and an idea level, and not on that sort of individual level. But that's not quite in vogue at the moment when you evaluate literature, in my opinion. The other problem is the author. It's this guy, M.M. Hastings, the chicken farmer. The guy who invented a health food snack called Weenie Winks, who dabbled in urban planning, who spent most of his career writing for hacky, pop-lit trash magazines. He's just not the kind of guy you want to get your literature from. He's not a tortured Russian dissident. He's not like a monocle-wearing English gentleman from the upper classes. He doesn't have a sob story. As far as I know, he wasn't like desperately poor. He's not like your Van Gogh type of character who, has mental illness or something to sort of make him stand out. He's not like James Dean, where he, died or killed himself, or, Marilyn Monroe, where you have a young death that sort of draws attention to the artist's career, in the moment of their death. He just, he lived a pretty normal life. He did a lot of crazy different things that you wouldn't expect or want, really, from a literary person. And it all sort of distracts and takes away from his voice and from his authority as someone who is permitted or allowed to write a work of literature. He doesn't have the pedigree for it. He doesn't have the background that you'd want. Nobody wants to get their literature from the same guy who's trying to sell them Weenie Winks, the health food snack, right? It just doesn't leave a very good taste in your mouth. So that's why I think this book has been underappreciated thus far. But I've already given you the reasons why I think it does deserve to be in the canon, in that, in that group of rare select books that we hold up and say these were the pioneers and these are the most important books in the genre. And I think it is. And I think this book probably influenced a lot of the books that came after it. For example, Brave New World. Of course, Aldous Huxley never talks about this book. What we do know is that Fritz Lang's Metropolis was almost certainly heavily influenced by this book. And Metropolis went on to influence a lot of what happened afterwards in the science fiction and dystopian genres. So at least indirectly, this book has had a pretty impactful presence within the genre, even though it's pretty much forgotten and all but dead and buried itself today. And I don't think that should be this book's fate. I think this book deserves more, and that's why I republished it, that's why I edited it, that's why I created an audiobook version, it's why I gave this book some love, is because I don't think it should die. I don't think it should be lost and forgotten forever. I think it should be resurrected and popularized and appreciated for the work of literary genius is maybe a strong word, but significance, certainly, that it is. Thank you.